Hi, I'm Margot. I paint live on Twitch, and I'm also doing a series of tutorials here on YouTube. So today we're going to learn how to paint an orange slice. So the reason I chose an orange to paint today is because it's a very basic shape to sketch, and then most of the skill is in the painting. So you're just drawing a circle and then a curved edge triangle. So to start, we're going to talk about materials. Make sure you're using paper that is meant for watercolors. I'm going to be using Canson XL in this video. You can use that, or you can use another type of watercolor paper. As long as it says watercolor paper and is 140 pound or more, you should be good to go. For paint today, I'm going to be using the Rubens watercolor palette. And I'll only be using 2 brushes for this particular painting. I'll be using a size 1 round brush and a size 8 round brush. Other things you'll need are paper towel, a palette, and preferably a kneaded eraser, but a regular eraser will work just fine. If this is your first time trying watercolors, I do have an introduction to watercolors video up on my channel. If you want to go check that out, I will link it down below, and hopefully that'll be helpful. Alright, let's get started. The first thing we have to do is draw the orange slice. So the first thing is to just draw out a circle. I'm measuring where the center of my paper is so that I can position the orange slice to be central on the piece of paper. I'm using a compass to make a circle, but you don't necessarily need one if you don't have one. You can trace a cup or a pencil sharpener, anything circular, or you could freehand it. And keep in mind that your circle doesn't necessarily have to be perfect because oranges have flat sides and dents, so don't worry if your circle is a little bit wonky, it'll still do just fine. Next, we're drawing the little orange segments. Orange segments are shaped like triangles that have very soft curved edges. If you'd like them all to be even, you can make a smaller circle within your orange slice and meet all the edges on that circle. I decided instead to freehand it and purposely make them a little bit uneven just to make it look more natural. Another thing I'm doing to make the orange slice look more natural is making them meet not in the center of the circle, but a little bit further out. This allows some of the segments to be longer than others, and usually when you have an orange slice, the center is not perfectly centered. When working with watercolors on top of pencil marks, it's very important that these marks are erased as much as possible while still being able to see them. Water tends to darken the graphite and to lock it into place so you can't erase it afterwards. I recommend using a kneaded eraser, which allows you to pick up the pigment very slowly so you can find the point where the lines are as light as possible but still visible to you so that you can use it as a guide. If you don't have a kneaded eraser, that's okay. You can use a normal eraser to lightly erase the lines until you're left with a trace to paint over. Now let's get painting. I wet my paint palette with just a spray bottle with water to activate the colors, then I'm going to wet my brush and pick up some yellow. I'm going to start with more yellow tones to sit underneath the orange. In watercolor, you always start with the lightest tones first and gradually build up to darker ones. After mixing some yellow with some water, I'm testing it on a scrap piece of watercolor paper to see how it will look. Watercolor always looks different in the palette than it will look on the paper, so always have a little test paper nearby just to make sure your color is just right before putting it on your piece. The color we're trying to achieve here is a nice pale yellow. I don't want it to be too bright, so I tried to use more of an orange toned yellow to begin. Now let's get painting. First we're going to use the wet on wet method. I'm using the size 8 brush for this as it can hold more water at a time than a smaller brush, but it is possible with the size 1 as well. I'm putting clean water on the whole circle that we drew. Then I'm picking up the light yellow and flowing it into the water on the circle. If your brush is getting dry or the paint is not flowing enough, you can always add more water to your brush to help the paint continue to flow. Wet on wet allows you to cover big spaces evenly without dried areas leaving streaky lines. If you're having trouble seeing the paper, don't worry, I'm going to be zooming in a moment. Now before we do anything else, we have to let the first layer dry. Watercolor is all about layering. If you want things to flow into each other and blend, you paint while the first layer is still wet, but if you want a more clean line or a distinct area of color that doesn't flow outside of the lines, you work wet on dry. This is probably the biggest mistake I made and that I see other people make when learning watercolors. If you're getting impatient waiting, you can use a hairdryer or fan the paper out, as long as there are no big puddles of water that could go rogue and flow out of the space they're meant to stay in. Feel free to do what you have to do to get it dry, but do not paint on wet watercolor for your next layer. Now that we have a fully dry first layer, make sure it's dry, just give it a touch, make sure it feels dry. This is very, very important. We're going to stick with the same color, but make it a darker version. To do this, we just have to raise the ratio of paint pigment to water. So I'm adding more of the orangey yellow to our color, swatching as I go to make sure we're getting the right color. You don't have to make the exact colors I'm making as long as you start with a really watered down yellow, then do the next layer in a slightly darker yellow, you're on track. I'm going to link a video in the description that teaches you about color mixing. It's done with oils in the video, but the theory applies to any paint you're trying to mix. It changed the way I mix colors, and if you're having trouble with color mixing, I think it'll really help you too. So with our slightly darker yellow, I'm loading up the size 1 brush and then wiping it in the corner of the palette to make the bristles sharp. This is because I want to make a clean edge with this color, so I want all the bristles to be together. So I'm taking the color and I'm making the first layer of the orange peel. Trace the edge of your circle all the way around. And don't worry if your line isn't perfectly straight, orange peels have bumps and textures. Just take the color all the way around and you've done your first layer of the orange peel. Now we're going to start with the orange segments. If you look at a picture of orange slices, you'll see all these little juicy gems within each segment. To make the orange look its most delicious, we're going to make these gems as well as make the orange look wet and reflective. This sounds harder to do than it is, so bear with me. Watercolor is all about light to dark and preserving highlights. What this means is the lightest color you have is the paper, so we need to save these little spots of brightness and light instead of painting over them. So for each orange segment, we're going to paint in lots of tiny lines. I'm going to show you with the purple color because the yellow is very light to use for clear example. I'm just pulling the color along and leaving little gems of our lightest color as I go. Thinking about the soft petal shape of those gems. Just little lines over and over again, not worrying about filling the space, just purposely leaving gaps. This can be as neat or as messy as you'd like. You can shape each individual gem, or you can make random lines starting and stopping them wherever it feels right. And we're going to do that with each segment of the orange. Remember to end each segment towards the center, but to leave the gap between the segments to stay the lightest color. This would be the white part of the center of the orange slice. You may also notice when I reach the edge of each segment, I'm doing a horizontal line to close off the edge. This helps me to see clearly where to stop my vertical lines without getting too close to the peel of the slice. We want to remember to leave that white space in between our segments and the peel. With these two painting methods, the lines with the gaps and just going around the rim of the orange slice, you already know how to paint this entire orange. The rest is about gradually darkening up your color and lots of layers, letting them all dry in between painting. Don't worry, I'm not abandoning you here. I'm still going to tell you how to do all of that, but there's no reason to feel intimidated by painting this orange. You already know how. I'm going to leave this in real time so that you can get as many examples as you feel you need, but I'll also put a timestamp here so you can just jump to the next part if you'd like. So at this point we have what looks like a very faded lemon. If you want to turn this into a lemon slice, you totally could. This is the fork in the citrus painting road. I'm just putting some water into this palette here because my water is off screen and I wanted to have it more visible for the camera. So we have our first layer of the orange peel and we have our first layer of orange segments. So the next step is to start blending. I'm taking some clean water and I'm going to blend the dried out paint of the orange peel. I'm using the tip of my brush and touching just the edge of the hard line towards the center. I'm going in circular motions, picking up more clean water when the brush dries out. The reason I'm doing this is because when you look at an orange slice, it gradually gets darker going towards the peel. We're moving our lightest color gradually into this next color. We're not trying to blend out the entire peel, just softening the stark line between the peel and the rest of the orange. Remember to keep the outermost line stark. Now we're going to make a more orange color. I start by adding some more yellow to raise the ratio between pigment and water. Then I'm adding red a little bit at a time until I get this very light orange color. We're going to start again with the edge of the orange, not covering all of the previous peel color. Now we're back to the same line and gap method that we did before. Remember to make sure that your layer is dry before you do your next color. The darker the color gets, the less we're going to use in the segment. We want each color to shine through a little bit, so I'm being a little bit more precise as the colors get darker. I'm preserving the lightest parts that we already left with the last coat of paint, as well as preserving some of the lemony yellow layer that we just did. With watercolor, you can't add light colors and highlights on top. And then here again, I'm just blending the center line of the peel. I'm taking some plain water on my brush and softening that harsh edge into the last color that we had here. We're going to be using the same color, just darkening it up a little bit more, making it more orange with a touch of red and lots more of the yellow. So first I'm just going around the very edge. I'm trying to make sure to leave a little margin of each color we've done so far so that we can build that color out to the peel gradually as is seen in orange slices. So I'm just doing the very edge for this part. So now we're going to do something a little bit different. So with that same color that we just used to go around the whole peel, I'm making some little tiny dots going inwards a little bit more. This is to kind of make the pores of the peel, so that white part of the peel always kind of has little divots and pores, so I'm using the same orange color to give it some of that. I'm just kind of doing little dots, trying not to make them too patterned or even by following the edge, but kind of going back and forth instead of just in a row. And now that we've put some orange for the pores of the peel, we're going to go back to our orange segments. So we're doing the exact same thing again. No need to worry, you already know how to do this, but now it's looking more like an orange and less like a lemon because this is our most orange color so far. So here it gets a little bit trickier. So we're just blending out the peel as we've done before, but we want to make sure to preserve some of the dots. So I'm not taking as much water on my brush as I normally would. I'm not blending in the same spot repetitively. I'm kind of going over it very quickly to soften any harsh edges, but to still keep those little dots and pores that we made intact. Just do the same thing you did before, just a little bit faster, and don't focus on one spot for too long. We do want some of these harsh edges to stick around, not all of them, but we do want to just soften everything up to make it look more blended in. So now we're going to mix some intense orange. This is going to be the darkest color so far. Remember, in watercolor you go from lightest to darkest, so every single layer is going to be a little bit darker than the one before it. And the first step by now, you should know, we're just going around the edge of the peel, leaving a little margin of every color that came before it, so we're just going on the very edge. And for this color as well, I found that this was a good color to kind of give the edge of the orange more texture, so I'm being a little bit less perfect in my circle motion and kind of making it a little bumpier, just keep giving it that orange texture on the outside. So for that, instead of doing a smooth line, in every couple places or so, just kind of lift your brush a little bit more up and make a little bump. For the darkest orange so far, what I'm doing here is I'm doing the same line method, but I'm concentrating it more on the outside of the segment. Towards the center of the segment, I'm going to keep a little bit lighter. We're going to blend the dark orange into the center a little bit later on, but for now we're just putting it on the outside of each segment. So here's where we're going to blend it in. So I'm just taking clean water on my brush. We're blending just like we did before when blending the harsh edges of the peel, but instead we're going to kind of go with the motion of the brush strokes. So I'm just going up and down, not in circular motion, just with a wet brush and bringing that bright orange color down and kind of blending harsh edges between dark color and highlight. I'm also softening the very outside edge that connects the segment to the peel, just to make it look more natural and to not have that stark line connecting it. I find blending after watercolor is dry really lends to that realism effect where things kind of softly go into each other instead of really suddenly. So here I'm mixing a little bit of a wash. So sometimes if I find that the colors that I have aren't exactly what I want, or I want a big area to be toned in a certain way, I do this kind of wash where it's just like blending with water, except I'm blending with slightly tinted water. So I'm making this really light yellow, and I'm going over each segment as well as the lines separating them. I don't go over that white part in the center of the orange, but all the lines in between the segments as well as the segments themselves are just getting a little bit of a wash of this yellow. Now I am being careful to avoid some of my highlight points because I don't want everything to turn yellow, I just want a little bit of a tint. And now we're going in with just plain water again and blending out the very harsh edge of the peel. You've done this before, you've got this. I'm just making it look a little bit more blended and bringing that color in. So as I'm blending, because the color is so dark, I'm picking up a lot of the orange color on my brush. I'm using just water and the color that I'm reactivating, and as I'm blending out, I'm kind of turning it into dot work. So this is again to add to the whole pour thing that we have going on for the peel. So all I'm doing is just using plain water, blending out the color, and then as I pick up that color on my brush, dotting it back onto the white part of the orange peel. This brings us a lot of texture and a lot of colorful interest. I tend to do more of the dot work in between segments and then leave the part that's right above the segment more white. Now we're going to mix a very intense orange-red color. So this is going to be used only for little spots of shadow. So with this orange red, I'm going around the very, very edge of the peel. I know I've said that every time, but the darker you get, the smaller the amount that you're going to put on is. So this is just because shadows tend to add intensity to watercolor. When we first started out, it looked like a lemon, and now we're adding some really dark, intense colors that really give it that lifelike appearance. So I know working with dark colors can be a little bit scary, but don't worry, we're using it sparingly, and if you use it too much, we can always blend it out. So for the segments, we're not doing what we normally do. Instead of making a bunch of lines and leaving gaps, we are just making little spots. So I'm focusing it only in certain spots to highlight the gems of the orange. If you look at an orange slice, you see that the gems that are further down have that darker kind of look to them, so that's what we're making. It does look a little bit stark for now, but knowing me, you know I'm going to blend it. Just put tiny little gems of the dark color throughout your segments. While we wait for that dark color to dry, we're taking the same dark color and going around the edge of the orange peel. So we're making those dots again, giving the orange some pores, just tiny, tiny little dots just with the tip of your brush. Make sure to not have too much water so that you don't get a water spot. Just try to keep your brush pretty dry and make little tiny dots. And now that our little dark gems are dry, we're going in with some plain water and blending them out as we have blended the segments in the past. So I'm just using plain water and blending out the edge first, then going in a vertical motion across the whole segment, trying to make sure to avoid the highlights so that they stay bright. Guess what we're doing next? We're gonna blend. My whole watercolor method is just blending things out, I swear. So we're blending out those dots that we made with the really bright red orange. We're just softening it up and making sure the dots stay intact where you can still see the separation of color, but so that they're a little softer. It's all about softness. So this is our final step. You're almost there. So I'm just using this red-brown color. If you don't have this color, you can mix some red with some brown, and we're just going to make the thinnest line we have so far on the edge of the peel. This isn't so much to color the edge of the peel, but more to indicate the shadow and to make the orange slice pop from the page. Like this whole tutorial, the step is optional, but I really find when I'm doing one piece in the center of a white paper, it really helps to make it pop out and look more realistic. So I'm just making the thinnest line using minimal water so that I can control the paint as much as possible. And I'm just going around making sure to keep in mind the lumps and bumps that I've given this orange and not missing out on any of the texture. Oh my goodness, you painted an orange slice. I am so proud of you. You could keep going at this point if you wanted to. Looking back at this video, I might add a little bit more darkness to the segments and make those highlights pop more by adding some more darkness to contrast. But I'm really happy with how the peel turned out with all those layers. I hope this video was helpful in allowing you to create a painting of an orange slice. I'm planning on doing more watercolor tutorials as well as watercolor lessons on my channel, so if you have any suggestions for what you would like to see, please leave it in the comments down below. And before you go, I'd just like to let you know that I do have a shop update coming on March 25th. In that shop update, there will be lots of different things, including a very special print and sticker of an opera house from Ukraine. All profits made from this print and the sticker will be going directly to help relieve the people of Ukraine, so I would very much appreciate if you could check that out. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely day, and until next time, bye!